Hello, everybody. My name is Alessandro Marranesi, and I teach Roman history at the University of Pavia. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the representation of power through the past, and in particular, how Emperor Constantine, 4th century Emperor Constantine, used and imitated Emperor Trajan to create his power, his political power. So let's start with my PowerPoint, where you can see, of course, my the title of my presentation. As you probably know, in Greek mythology, Heracles, the son of Zeus, performed 12 labors, a dozen incredibly difficult and highly dangerous tasks. But slaying the Nemean lion or battling the Lernaean hydra must have been a walk in the park compared to what Vladimir Putin has had to deal with, as this BBC report very well explains.
Well, whenever it's Vladimir Putin's birthday, strange things tend to happen in Russia. What's happening behind me now is, quite frankly, very strange. It's an art exhibition comparing President Putin to the Greek hero Hercules, organized by the so-called Vladimir Putin supporters group. Now, Hercules was the son of Zeus, and so the story goes, he carried out 12 labors, 12 incredibly difficult tasks. Tasks have been redrawn, reinterpreted to represent Vladimir Putin's deeds in the Kremlin. For example, instead of Hercules slaying the Nemean lion, we see Vladimir Putin battling terrorism. And next door, whereas Hercules took on the multi-headed hydra, here we see Vladimir Putin battling the European Union, Japan, Canada, and the United States. His response to Western sanctions. It is Hercules and the Cretan bull, or rather Vladimir Putin, the Crimea.
У нас это все-таки лежит в культуре нашей страны, в нашей тысячелетней истории.
This has been part of our culture for 1,000 years. A strong leader has always been at the center of society here. And we, the people, have trusted them, the czars, the emperors, or general secretaries of the Communist Party. Vladimir Putin continues that tradition. He is a hero of the people. It's hard to imagine an exhibition like this in London or Washington comparing David Cameron or Barack Obama to mythological heroes. But Russia is different. Certainly over the 15 years that Vladimir Putin has been in power, something of a personality cult has built up around him. Now, the Kremlin has claimed many times in the past that it's had nothing to do with that. It hasn't encouraged that. The Kremlin critics don't believe it. What is true, though, is that despite the pressure that Russia is under from Western sanctions, Vladimir Putin has been enjoying the kind of approval ratings of late domestically that Western politicians and even Hercules himself could only dream of. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News.
So, the reporter affirms that it would be impossible in Western democracies this kind of exhibitions. However, though they are not artistic representations, even in Europe and in the US, other media depict political leaders, comparing them to historical personalities. Historical and mythological examples are used by modern media to praise leaders, to show loyalty to them, to criticize, and of course, to mock them. In general, these images offer ideological comparison for their audiences, and in so doing, they provide models from the past to influence and to re-elaborate the image of the leader. Obviously, the instigators of these images are different. Sometimes these models can be inspired directly by the leader or by his inner circle, as probably in the case of Mr. Vladimir Putin. Sometimes, as in the case with the cover depicting Silvio Berlusconi as Caesar, they certainly come from communicative agents not involved in the propaganda organized by the leader self, like single activists or journalists, publishers, political, economical, or social organizations hostile to him. The aim of my lesson today is to investigate if, and eventually how, a particular model from the past, the 2nd century Emperor Trajan, appears and affects political communication of another early 4th century Roman Emperor, Constantine the Great. In fact, together with the partially earlier studied examples of Alexander the Great or Claudius Gothicus, we can find more than a clue that also the 2nd Emperor Trajan was used as a model to shape the Constantinian ideology. Scholars acknowledge only the existence of some suspected connection between the two emperors, between Constantine and this possible model Trajan, although in a highly fragmented fashion. For example, in the satirical work De Caesaribus, written by Emperor Julian around the end of 362 AD, where a boastful and conceited Constantine, after having highlighted his superiority to Caesar and Octavian, affirms that in comparison with Trajan, you find here on the PowerPoint the Greek text. I'm going to read it, translation. It would be only fair to regard me as his, Trajan's, equal on the score of that territory which he added to the empire, and I, Constantine, recovered. Using a pungent irony, the last pagan ruler describes Constantine desiring and searching for a direct relationship with his 2nd century predecessor, underlying his equality with Trajan in a military perspective. According to the majority of scholars, other hints of the existence of a relation between Constantine and Trajan come from the arch erected after the Battle of Milvius Bridge in Rome in 312. As generally accepted, the spolia included the Constantinian arch next to the Colosseum, were used to transmit precise political images. Not restricted to the utilitarian material recycle of ancient works. Ancient reliefs, sculptures, and tondi representing battles and ceremonies led by emperors such as Trajan, Adrian, and Marcus Aurelius would have been used to define a material and ideological network of canons and models necessary to represent the new liberator urbis. A third suspect of Trajanic inspiration in Constantinian representation is less direct, but it involves one of the most influential intellectuals of the early 4th century, Lucius Caecilius Firmianus Lactantius. In his most well-known work, De Mortibus Persecutorum, on the deaths of the persecutors, the English translation, written immediately after the Battle of Milvius Bridge, the negative character of Emperor Galerius is repeatedly described as a summa of the negative qualities typical of enemies and persecutors of Christianity, depicting the invasion that Galerius, this bad emperor, conducted in Italy during the late summer of 307. Lactantius remembered that he supposedly proposed to call his new empire as Daciscum. Find here the Latin text, and I'm going to read a translation in English. Consequently, the region of Italy through which that pestilential column marched was devastated. Everything was pillaged, women were raped, maidens violated, and parents and husbands tortured to betray their daughters, their wives, and their possessions. Cattle and pack animals were driven off, as though they were booty seized from barbarians. This was the way in which he got himself back to his own territories. Once a Roman emperor, now a devastator of Italy, he had caused the universal damage one expects of an enemy. He had in the past received the title of emperor, but now he had declared himself an enemy of the Roman name. He wanted the empire to be called not the Roman, but the Dacian Empire. The comparison appears clear. As Trajan was the first conqueror of Dacia and winner over the barbarians, so Constantine overtook Galerius, Emperor Galerius, enemy of Constantine, Daciscum Imperium, and restored the Roman civilization. In other words, the construction of an association between Galerius and the barbaric Dacia formed a stereotype not only very useful in emphasizing Galerius' negative attitude, but also effective in highlighting Trajan as a positive model for Constantine. Thus, we now have more than a clue about the existence of political connections between the two emperors. But we do not have a general scenario, an official policy, which illustrates the fact that Constantine was, during his life, depicted using models provided by Trajan's tradition. Looking for more solid evidences, I investigated the adoption of the most characterizing unofficial title used by Trajan's communication. This title is Optimus Princeps. And how Constantine used this sentence, this short sentence, this title, Optimus Princeps. As Pliny the Young explains, this epithet, this title, embraces all the virtues, and no one before Trajan deserved it. Moreover, the Trajanic title, Optimus Princeps, had marked his close relationship with Jupiter, Optimus Maximus. Furthermore, it is interesting to note that after Trajan's death, only Septimius Severus employed, and occasionally in his coinage, the legend, the title, Optimus Princeps. The first examples in which Constantine is represented as Optimus Princeps come from the imperial mint of Arelate, nowadays south of France, Arles, in coins dated to 310. We can still register the existence of 6 bronze coins mintages dedicated to Constantine, reporting on reverse the legend SPQR Optimo Principi. In 310, Constantine was in Arelate, in the city of Arelate, in Arles. And from there, he moved to the nearby city of Massilia to fight against the two-time usurper Maximian. In Massilia, Maximian had barricaded himself while trying to convince his troops to resist Constantine, who, in the end, forced him to commit suicide. The coins minted in Arles, and in a limited number also in the city of Treveri, are the first witnesses of the Trajanic model existence. By re-employing all coin types, typically from Ostia, and in accordance with the center's input, these coins formulated this implicit message. I'm appropriating the Trajanic title, the Trajanic epithet, because I am the new Trajan. When Constantine moved to Italy to defeat Maxentius, local mints started to imitate coins reporting the Trajanic legend. The image you see now is exactly taken by this historical moment. In particular, here, the legend SPQR Optimo Principis appears for the first time in Italy on a solidus, a golden coin, minted in Ticinum, in Pavia, where I'm speaking now from, during the years 312, 313, and in a very consistent number of coins created in Rome and in Ostia during the same years 312, 313. Now, a general pattern starts to become clearer. Constantine needed positive model when, as young Augustus, as young emperor in Gaul, and then in Gaul, and then in Italy, he forced Maximian to commit suicide. And when he defeated in Italy the Emperor Maxentius, who was there, his first enemy. At the same time, mints started to broadcast an imagery. It's not the only existing imagery taken by the past. There is, for example, another one in this age, represented Constantine as a new Constantius the Goth, another emperor. But now Trajan starts to become the most intriguing, the most powerful political figure represented in Constantine imagery. So mints started to broadcast this imagery, capable to connect Constantine with a great, beloved, super popular emperor like Trajan, past emperor, very popular, and to create positive representation for local elites, soldiers, and senatorial class. In other words, during the very first years of his reign, he Constantine promoted the construction of different images capable of providing in different ways convergence of different social powers on him. In particular, Optimus Princeps was a unifying reminder to Trajan that since 310 had been employed by Constantine to broadcast a Trajanic imagery. The Trajanic character, as the insistence of the ancestry with Claudius Gothicus, another emperor, as I mentioned earlier, was one of the models used to sound out new messages and to define new imageries from the center. Constantine, as many of his predecessors, and as Maxentius during the same years, broadcasted his identities reusing and recycling not only archaeological spolia, as we have seen, but also ancestors, virtues, traditions, ethical and moral models in order to shape identities acceptable also for the most conservative groups, not only in Rome. The existence of these Optimus Princeps coins seems to be even more important if compared with contemporary Christian literature. Just to give you an example, Tertullian, which was a Christian emperor, represented for the first time Trajan not just as a persecutor of Christians. And Tertullian is a model taken then also by other Christian authors, like Jerome's. In other words, Christian authors described in a negative way Trajan because he was considered powerful and negative persecutor of Christians. Tertullian is the first to slightly change this perspective, even if he describes Trajan in negative way. But we have seen before as Lactantius, who was very close to Constantine, and he was Christian, he described in a not negative way Trajan. So there is an ideological change which takes the Christian perspective and which tries to re-represent a Christian negative model, Trajan, the persecutor, in a not negative model, thanks to Lactantius. But it's not enough, because not only Lactantius, not only Christian literature tries to change and to model in a positive way, or in a not negative way, Trajanic representation, because there are also pagan texts, pagan literature, which used, as it's possible seen in these examples. You can see here just the Latin text, but it's enough, because what is interesting to see how in these panegyrics, so in these discourses written to praise Constantine, the authors, and in particular Nazarius, employed the figure Pater Optimus, Imperator Optime, you see in different passages of this text, to retake, to recycle another image, which is typical of Trajan representation, and we have already seen it. Optimus Princeps, clearly retaken on coins and inspiring in these discourses, represented in this very case in 321 in Rome, in front of Constantine's sons. There is another kind of media which was extremely popular in Roman time, and this is inscriptions. Inscriptions were everywhere. So broadcasting messages through inscriptions was a powerful way to describe, to define a propaganda. We have precise attestation that this inscription you find here described, taken in Latin and extremely popular in northern Italy, represent, using another language, again the form humanarum rerum optimo principi, to define Constantine, Constantino Maximo Pio. The text was reported in a specific form of inscription, milestones, which were put in particular, as I mentioned before, in northern Italy. You see here on this map where exactly these inscriptions have been found. It's extremely interesting to see how between 327, 328, in the northern part of Italy, many milestones reporting this text. And in this text, there was the inscription, the title, Humanarum Rerum Optimo Principi, was used. Before this expression, Humanarum Rerum Optimo Principi, was never employed before in such inscriptions. And for this reason, it has been discussed for many years by scholars, because it's difficult to understand why this expression, why in this part, why in 327, 328. The years 326 to 327 were characterized for Constantine by a period of a short but impacting crisis, distinguished by the baffling murders of his son Crispon and his wife Fausta. So Although the appearance of these milestones may have depended on local circumstances, for example, Constantine visited the north of Italy in 326, and for this reason there were strong maintenance works on the local road network. And perhaps even if they have been created and dedicated by local officials, so not on a central level, it's clear that the Optimus Princeps topic comes up. And again, probably because Constantine, in the years before the creation of these milestones, it was in a moment of political crisis, again, as in 310, as in 312, so in period of crisis, in period of big political and military changes, Constantine decided to use a winning model, helpful to diffuse a good imagery and to overcome a period of political crisis. So, as he did in 310 using Claudius Gothicus and Trajan, as he did again in 312 and 313 using Trajan, now it's time again to employ Trajan, targeting its use on a specific media, milestones, in a specific place, north of Italy. The Trajanic messages, the Trajanic imagery, Optimus Princeps, on milestones in 327 represented for Constantine the start of a counter-offensive based on Trajan's imitation, which ended 1 year later. In the spring of 328, Constantine was in Nicomedia. After having left the city, he arrived near the Danube, where he built the stone bridge from Oescus to Suicidava, which announced his intention of carrying war beyond the river and reconquering Dacia. In doing so, he had rebuilt the Trajan's bridge across the Danube. Only with 3 campaigns in 332, in 334, and in 336, Constantine was able to re-obtain the emperor of Dacia, the provincia of the province of Dacia. But recycling the imagery of the past, Constantine had already been an Optimus Princeps for 24 years. In every society, different kinds of media inspire their audiences with different kinds of messages. As today, Mr. Vladimir Putin is described as devoted to Hercules, as a modern Commodus, or as an healthy athlete, as a new Tsar, as an archaeologist, a Lenin reincarnation, and even as the fictional character Frank Underwood, the president of the United States in the discussed series House of Cards. So Trajan was, 17 centuries ago, one of the models that media inspired but not necessarily directly controlled by Constantine, used to describe him and to create positive imageries, as well as Claudius Gothicus, Alexander the Great in the eastern provinces, and Augustus were other inspiring historical characters employed to sound out ideological messages. Thank you for your attention. In case of questions, please do not hesitate to write me. My email address is alessandro.maranesi@unipv.it. Thank you for your attention and best wishes from Pavia. Bye-bye.